Oliver's 6-year marriage did not end with a loud divorce, but shattered the moment he saw water droplets on a towel that was not his. Betrayal sometimes does not roar like thunder, but only quietly like steam rising from the second floor bathtub. There are betrayals that do not explode, they only whisper. You walk into your own home to grab a forgotten folder, and the silence suddenly feels so wrong. You hear water running upstairs, down a hallway behind a door, and there they are. Your wife in the tub with the neighbor, using your soap, your towel, your home. In a single frame, your marriage turns to ashes. Tonight's story is not for us to gloat over anyone's fall, and it is not here to judge. It is for us to sit with the cruel moment when trust is not only broken, but used against you. Because this man did not scream or wave his arms. He stayed calm, locked the bathroom door, and made a quiet call to the neighbor's wife. And when she arrived and saw what he saw, everything changed. Stay with me, because the real shock does not lie in what happened in the tub, but in what they are planning next. Oliver stood there, a quiet figure in a house in Richmond, London. He was 42 years old, an experienced risk assessment expert for giant insurance corporations. In Oliver's world, everything was probability and variables. Sienna, his beautiful 38-year-old wife, always believed Oliver was a dry fool, a man who only knew how to immerse himself in soulless columns of numbers on spreadsheets. She looked down on his meticulousness, seeing it as the weakness of someone who did not know how to enjoy romance. But Sienna did not know that Oliver's real power lay in that quiet observation. He was trained to see the smallest deviations in a seemingly perfect system. Oliver knew exactly how her heart rate changed when she lied about shopping at Waitrose. He noticed when Julian, the 40-year-old neighbor with the flashy look of a successful architect, began to appear too often in her small talk. That morning, everything looked as perfect as a postcard of the British middle class. The Richmond neighborhood glowed in the pale sunlight typical of London. Sienna smiled goodbye to him at 8:10 in the morning, a bright but empty smile. He noticed she had sprayed expensive perfume meant only for special occasions, even though she said she was just staying home to tidy up the library. Oliver said nothing. He did not ask questions. He backed his car out of the driveway, waving to Julian, who was mowing the lawn across the street. In his heart, Julian was laughing at Oliver, seeing him as a poor, betrayed husband who did not even know. But Oliver was not a victim. He was the person adjusting the final parameters of an exploding risk. Betrayal had begun whispering long ago in this house, and Oliver was ready to record every word of it. He drove away, but his heart had begun counting down every minute until their stage curtain had to fall. The cul-de-sac neighborhood where Oliver lived was the embodiment of upper-class tranquility in the heart of London. Meticulously manicured lawns, white-painted wooden fences, and the distant sound of the River Thames flowing through Richmond Park created an atmosphere of perfect stillness. To Sienna and Julian, Oliver was just a part of that quiet background. They saw him wake up at 6:15 in the morning, brew a cup of Earl Grey tea, and sit reading the newspaper mechanically before boarding the train to the city center. They believed his soul was as dry and predictable as the risk insurance contracts he signed every day. Sienna often looked at her husband with a mixture of pity and boredom. She believed she was controlling the game, that she had completely blindfolded her husband, who only knew logical analysis charts. But Oliver was not just watching. He was recording. He realized Sienna had changed her phone password 3 weeks ago. He noticed Julian's Range Rover frequently stopping at the corner at 10:30 in the morning, right after Oliver left for the office. Julian, an arrogant architect, always believed he could design everyone else's lives as he pleased. He looked at Oliver as a loser holding a treasure without knowing how to use it. Julian and Sienna had begun a dance of lies right under the noses of Oliver and Isabel. Isabel, Julian's wife, was a head nurse at the local hospital. She was a dedicated woman who always brought meat pies to Oliver's house every weekend. Trust in Richmond was not just a concept. It was the only currency to maintain this glamorous outward appearance. Oliver sat in his office on the 22nd floor of a skyscraper, looking down at the rushing crowds below. He opened a hidden folder on his personal computer. Inside were not insurance contracts, but a detailed log of deviations. He had recorded that last Tuesday, Sienna spent £500 at a lingerie boutique that she never wore for him. He also noticed the house's water meter jump abnormally on afternoons when Sienna was supposed to be alone. People looked down on his meticulousness, seeing it as a sign of a narrow and dull mind. They did not understand that this very meticulousness was helping Oliver build an impenetrable network of evidence. He did not need to be jealous in the usual way, because emotion was an unstable variable. He only needed data to establish a complete risk scenario. In her heart, Sienna was dreaming of a new life with Julian, where they would use the money she had secretly withdrawn from their joint savings account. She and Julian believed Oliver would collapse, scream, and beg when the truth was revealed. They were prepared to destroy him mentally and leave him empty-handed. But they had underestimated the man sitting quietly in this darkness. Oliver was not a victim in their story. He was the actual architect of the outcome they were about to suffer. When he looked at the photo of the four of them smiling brightly at a backyard barbecue last summer, Oliver felt a deep pity for them. They thought they were hunting, but they were actually the prey that had fallen into an appraiser's trap. The perfect picture in Richmond was beginning to crack, and Oliver was the only one who knew exactly when it would completely shatter. His silence was not ignorance, it was the weight of a master hunter. A storm was coming, and it would not leave any piece of the lies intact. The moment Oliver left the office at 12:47 in the afternoon was not an impulsive coincidence of a forgetful man. He had carefully calculated the time it took to travel from Waterloo Station back to Richmond. He told his supervisor that he had forgotten an important folder containing handwritten field assessment reports. A perfect excuse for a dedicated appraiser. But as he stepped off the train and breathed in London's damp air, Oliver's heart rate was remarkably steady. He moved with a deadly stillness. As his car turned into the familiar corner, his heart did not race with anxiety, but pounded with a final confirmation. Julian's car was not at the opposite curb. It was right on Oliver's driveway, parked as boldly and precisely as if its owner had done it hundreds of times. It was an act of arrogant territorial invasion. Oliver was in no rush. He turned off the engine, sat in silence for a few seconds, his eyes narrowing as he observed the house he had poured so much effort into maintaining. He used his key, opening the door as gently as possible. The house greeted him with a haunting silence. There was no music from Sienna's app, no sound from the television. Only the ticking of the clock in the hallway and the chill of the heating system set to 22 degrees Celsius. He walked through the living room, noticing small, deviant details. A cushion displaced on the sofa, Sienna's slippers not in their usual spot. Everything was screaming that a foreign presence had disturbed his order. Then he heard it. The trickling sound of water from the second floor. The faint sound of the shower was muffled by the walls and the closed master bathroom door. Oliver climbed the stairs slowly, each creak beneath his feet sounding like hammer strikes on the coffin of this marriage. The air began to carry the scent of eucalyptus and the warmth of steam, a fragrance he and Sienna had chosen together. The bathroom door was not fully closed. It was open about an inch, and steam escaped like the breath of a suffocating secret. He heard whispers, not of an argument, but intimate, low sounds, the kind of conversation people only have when they believe no one else is listening. Oliver's hand hovered over the doorknob. His other hand clenched, but he was not gasping for breath. He felt as if he were detached from his body, watching from above an accident he had predicted long ago. He pushed the door open. They did not hear the sound immediately because the water was still running. Their heads leaned together, half submerged in soap bubbles, giggling at something. And then Sienna looked up. Her eyes met Oliver's gaze, and every bit of pink on her face vanished instantly, giving way to a deathly pallor. Julian turned around moments later. His reaction was slower, defensive, his shock quickly turning into a cold calculation. "Don't move," Oliver said, his voice low but incredibly steady. Julian began to shift as if to stand up. "Don't," he repeated once more with an authority that made the arrogant architect freeze. They stayed still like cursed statues. Oliver took a step back, slamming the door shut. The sharp click of the lock echoed in the quiet hallway with a ruthlessness that was absolute. He did not scream. He did not cry. He turned, walked straight into the bedroom, and picked up the phone on the bedside table. His 10 fingers glided across the screen with the absolute precision of a specialist handling a total loss claim. Everything was set. Their game was over, and Oliver's hunt had officially begun. He was no longer the cheated husband. He was the keeper of the keys to truth and punishment. Oliver leaned his back against the hallway wall, the cold from the paint soaking through his thin shirt. Inside the bathroom, the sound of running water had stopped completely, replaced by panicked whispers and Sienna's weak knocking on the door. She was calling his name in a hoarse voice, but Oliver did not respond. He glided his finger across the phone screen, finding Isabel's number. When she picked up, Oliver's voice rang out cold and sharp like a surgical knife. "Isabel, I need you to come to my house right now. Don't ask why, just come." There was a long silence for 3 seconds on the other end of the line before Isabel agreed with a worried voice. While waiting, Oliver stepped into the dressing room opposite the bathroom. He was not seeking comfort, he was seeking the truth. On Sienna's vanity, her personal phone lay still, but a notification light suddenly flashed. Oliver picked it up. The password was still their wedding anniversary, a bitter irony for one-sided loyalty. He scrolled through the most recent messages. Tuesday was clear. He will leave at 8:10 in the morning. Another message from Julian. "Don't worry, everything is planned. Just leave the key in the usual spot." Oliver felt a jolt of electricity run down his spine. This was not an impulse. This was a schedule. They were not just betraying him, they were managing him like a nuisance variable in their new life. The doorbell rang 10 minutes later. Isabel stood on the porch under a London sky that was beginning to turn the dull gray of an approaching rain. She was still wearing her light blue nurse uniform, her face tired after a night shift, but still full of skepticism. Oliver did not say a word of greeting. He stepped back, signaling for her to enter, and led her straight to the second floor. When they stopped in front of the still-locked bathroom door, Julian's irritated voice echoed out. "Oliver, this is ridiculous. Open the door before I call the police." Isabel froze, her eyes widening as she recognized her husband's voice. "They are both in there," Oliver said, his voice as flat as a frozen lake. "In my bathtub." He handed Sienna's phone to Isabel. The final notification was still clear on the screen. Perfect Tuesday. He leaves at 8:10. Isabel stared at those words, her breathing becoming rapid. She shook her head as if to push away the truth existing right behind the oak wood of the door. Her hand trembled as she touched the doorknob, and then she bowed her head, covering her mouth to suppress a desperate scream. Oliver placed his hand on her shoulder, not to comfort her, but to keep her standing firm. "We cannot collapse now," he whispered. "They want us to go crazy. They want us to lose control so they can continue writing the script they have prepared. Look at how they have turned our trust into a weapon." Oliver felt the change in Isabel. Pain was gradually giving way to a cold resentment, just like his. They stood there, two souls betrayed by the ones they loved most and the neighbors they trusted most. Julian and Sienna thought they had the upper hand, that Oliver was just a fool being led by the nose. But in this narrow hallway, power had changed hands. Oliver was no longer the cheated husband. He and Isabel had become the supervisors of a case where the ones inside the bathroom were the criminals being caught red-handed. The silence between Oliver and Isabel now was not a stalemate, but the preparation for an all-out attack on the entire system of lies that the two inside had painstakingly built. The game was no longer about feelings. It had shifted into a war of existence and honor. Oliver led Isabel into his small study, a room filled with insurance files and risk analysis charts that Sienna had always dismissed as worthless scrap paper. The blue light from the monitor reflected onto Oliver's determined face, highlighting features as cold as a carved statue. He was not just skimming through romantic messages. He was dissecting a criminal plan. His fingers moved with speed, accessing hidden applications that Sienna believed a fool like him would never discover. Isabel stood beside him, her breath trembling as she watched the numbers dancing on the screen. Oliver discovered a series of recurring transfers, each about £300, beginning 3 months ago. The money was being moved into an anonymous e-wallet account. "This is not spending money for shopping trips," Oliver whispered, his voice ringing like clashing metal. "This is siphoning. a slow financial gutting designed to avoid raising an alarm. They are preparing for a perfect escape using the money from our hard work and sacrifice. But the real shock lay in a note titled Escape Plan. When Oliver opened that file, the room seemed to fall into a pit of frozen despair. Inside was a detailed roadmap to ruin Oliver's life. Sienna had recorded the days he worked overtime and the moments he was exhausted from work pressure, all to weave a story of mental instability and violent tendencies. She intended to use his very meticulousness and silence as evidence of a terrifying, controlling personality. A message from Julian made Isabel nearly collapse. Once Oliver loses his mind when he sees us, it will be the final nail in his coffin. We will have the house, the custody, and the freedom. They are not just having an affair, Oliver said, his eyes flashing with the sharp light of a predator who has caught his prey. They are committing character assassination. They want to turn me into a madman and you into an incompetent mother so they can seize everything. Julian, the architect you still love, is designing a prison for us inside our own home. Julian and Sienna had underestimated Oliver. They viewed him as a dull insurance expert, a variable easily discarded. They did not know that in the world of risk and loss, Oliver is the person who decides who is compensated and who is left with nothing. He turned to look at Isabel, who was no longer crying. This cruel betrayal had awakened a powerful survival instinct within her. "We will not react the way they want," Oliver declared. "They are waiting for a fit of rage to record, but they will only receive a verdict." He began backing up all the data to 5 different cloud storage accounts and sent a copy directly to his private solicitor. Oliver's calmness was no longer a sign of endurance. It was a display of power. He had seen their entire dirty blueprint, and now he would be the one to change the parameters so that the entire structure of lies would collapse on the very people who created it. This war was no longer about a bathtub or cowardly apologies. It had become a battle of intellect and truth, where Oliver held every trump card in his hand. Oliver stood before the bathroom door, his hand placed on the cold metal doorknob. He turned to look at Isabel, who was clutching the phone, which was in recording mode. "No long arguments, no physical contact. We only speak the truth," Oliver whispered. He turned the key. The small click echoed in the quiet hallway like a death sentence for the final illusions of the traitors. The door opened. Sienna stepped out first, her wet hair clinging to her pale face. She was wearing Oliver's gray hoodie, a disgusting appropriation. Julian followed, his shoulders squared in defiance, even though he was in an incredibly disheveled state. "Oliver, you are breaking the law," Julian growled, trying to regain the arrogance of a successful architect. "False imprisonment is a serious crime. I can call the police right now." Oliver did not blink. He took a step back to create a wide opening, removing any allegations of obstruction. "Go ahead and call them?" "Julian, they will be very interested to hear about the secret phone and the illegal transfer orders into the e-wallet that I just found." Sienna tried to step forward, her trembling hand intended to touch Oliver's arm. "Blaze, please listen to me. It was just a mistake. I was carried away. I didn't want this." "Don't," Oliver cut her off with a voice so cold it made Sienna recoil. "Don't use the tongue that just uttered vows to this man to plead with me. You weren't carried away. Sienna, you planned this 3 months ago. You calculated every minute I was away from home. You even made notes on how to turn me into a madman." Julian sneered, a toxic smile. "You think you've won? Sienna has spoken to a lawyer. We are filing for a protection order today. With the records of your controlling and quirky behavior, you will never step foot in this house again." Oliver smiled, the smile of a risk appraiser who had foreseen every disaster. "Is that why you installed the micro recorder under the vanity, Sienna? To provoke me, to make me angry so you would have evidence of violence? Unfortunately, it only recorded my silence and your filthy plotting through this door. I have recorded its location and sent it to my solicitor." The faces of Julian and Sienna froze. They looked at each other, their confidence beginning to crack as they realized the man they had long looked down upon was the one holding every script. Oliver stepped closer to Julian, only inches away, enough for the neighbor to feel the pressure of real power. "You have 10 minutes to pack your trash and get out of here. After 10 minutes, I will change all the locks. All communication will be through lawyers. And Julian, Pray that your architectural firm does not care about you using their resources to design personal frauds. Isabel stepped forward, looking directly into her husband's eyes with deep disgust. You lied to the children, Julian. You turned our home into a ruin of lies. You will not be allowed near Milo and Beck until there is legal intervention. Sienna collapsed to the floor, her sobs echoing through the hallway, but Oliver no longer felt any emotion. He turned his back and walked away, his shadow stretching long across the oak floor. He had won this battle, but the brutal legal war had only just begun. As the house door closed behind the two traitors, Oliver stood in the middle of the empty living room, taking a deep breath. The truth had been exposed, and now he would be the one to rewrite the final chapter of his own story, a chapter with no room for betrayal and deceit. The pounding on the door at 3:15 in the morning was not the sound of a neighbor visiting, but the knock of a manipulated fate. Oliver woke up, not out of fear, but with the extreme alertness of someone who had foreseen every risk. Sienna had started her next move. When he opened the door, the red and blue lights from the Metropolitan Police car reflected off the white walls of the Richmond neighborhood, turning the peaceful scene into a haunting crime scene. Two police officers stood there, their faces solemn. We received a report of domestic abuse and false imprisonment, one officer said. Oliver stepped back, his hands raised in full transparency, inviting them into the house. He did not explain with empty words. He handed them a tablet already open to a video clip from the Ring camera. The video clearly recorded 12:47 in the afternoon the previous day. It showed Sienna and Julian leaving the house, completely free, with no physical contact or threats from Oliver. He even stepped aside to let them pass. Sienna's lies began to crack right before the eyes of law enforcement. But that was only the beginning of the narrative war. While Oliver faced the police, Sienna had already posted tearful messages to the Richmond residents group chat. She painted a picture of a controlling husband who tracked her every step and made her feel unsafe in her own home. Neighbors who used to see Oliver as a dry fool now began to look at him with suspicion and disgust. Oliver sat in his study after the police left, following their recording of his absolute cooperation. He noticed a notification from Barclays Bank. An overdraft request for £10,000 had just been made under his name from an IP address at a cheap hotel in East London. Sienna was trying to drain his finances before the divorce officially began. She did not just want freedom, she wanted to completely destroy the foundation of Oliver's life. Julian was not sitting still either. He sent an anonymous email to the board of the insurance company where Oliver worked, implying that Oliver was under investigation for violent behavior and was no longer sane enough to make million-pound risk assessment decisions. But they had forgotten one thing. Oliver was an expert on loss. He knew how to protect assets even as the fire was spreading. He contacted Isabel, who was also facing similar accusations from Julian. Together, they built a counterattack network. Oliver did not argue on the residents' chat. He only quietly sent an official incident report and digital evidence to his solicitor to prepare for an irreversible legal blow. Sienna's indignation and Julian's arrogance were variables that Oliver had included in his equation. He felt a deep pity for them. They thought creating a false story would help them win, but in Oliver's world, only data was the ultimate truth. He stood by the window, looking out at London's misty rain, knowing that every mistake they made only thickened the punishment file he held. This war was not just about who was right or wrong, but about who would be the last one standing when the curtain of lies finally fell. Courtroom number 4 at the district court carried the scent of old oak and an atmosphere thick with lies waiting to be exposed. Sienna sat on the other side of the aisle, wearing a pristine white dress, her eyes made up to look as though she had stayed awake for many nights in fear. Her lawyer began with an eloquent tone, painting a portrait of Oliver as a domestic tyrant, a financial controller who had imprisoned his wife in a fit of mad jealousy. Julian sat right behind her, his face showing the smugness of someone who believed he had designed a perfect trap to destroy his opponent. They looked at Oliver with contempt, viewing him as just a lowly appraiser struggling in vain. Oliver stood up when it was his turn. He did not look like a man in fear. He opened his leather briefcase, pulling out a thick folder he called the annihilation file. Your Honor, I am not here to argue about emotions. I am here to present data, Oliver said, his voice echoing and steady like a bronze bell. He began to deliver fatal blows. First was the evidence of the micro-recorder Sienna had installed to trap him, but which accidentally recorded the dialogue between her and Julian about creating fake bruises. A deathly silence filled the room as the recording was played. You must remember to look shaky. We will say he pushed you. It is the only way to kick him out of the house. Sienna's face turned from pale to gray. Oliver continued to present statements from Barclays and HSBC, proving the siphoning of assets worth £15,000 into Julian's e-wallets. He presented emails Julian sent from his company computer, revealing a plot to use an architect's influence to forge property ownership documents. One by one, Oliver stripped away their saintly masks with the absolute precision of a risk analysis expert. He was no longer the despised husband. He was the person holding the scales of justice for his own life. Judge Howard narrowed her eyes at Sienna, the pen in her hand tapping 3 times on the table like hammer strikes on the coffin of lies. Truth does not need to scream. It only needs to be present, Oliver declared as he finished his presentation. The judge did not take much time to reach a decision. She completely rejected Sienna's protection order, declaring a freeze on all joint assets for a full forensic audit. Furthermore, she issued a warning about perjury and staging false evidence for both Sienna and Julian. Julian lost his arrogance, collapsing into his chair like a ruin, while Sienna burst into sobs, but this time no one believed those tears anymore. Oliver walked out of the court, taking a deep breath of the fresh air after the London rain. He had won the hearing, but he knew he had just officially buried his 6-year marriage under the courtroom floor. A strange sense of relief rose in his heart. He had been underestimated and betrayed, but in the end, his own sobriety and inner strength had helped him regain control of his destiny. The legal battle might still be long, but the kingdom of lies in Richmond had completely collapsed. Betrayal might bring down a roof, but truth builds a more enduring kingdom. Oliver stood in the middle of the living room in Richmond, looking into the void where a symbol of lies once stood, and he realized he had never felt so free. He dedicated 6 whole days to a complete cleansing. He replaced every lock, reset the security system, and swept every scent of Sienna out of every grain of wood in the house. The bathroom where he caught the deception red-handed now shone under white LED lights, smelling strongly of bleach and absolute cleanliness. Oliver had performed the greatest loss assessment of his career, and the result was the removal of the biggest risk, misplaced trust. Julian paid a price far steeper than money. His architectural firm conducted an internal investigation after receiving evidence from Oliver's solicitor. He was fired immediately for using company resources for illicit personal purposes and forging records. The reputation of a successful architect turned to ashes among the London elite. Isabel, the strong woman Julian once looked down upon, filed for divorce with the most aggressive terms, stripping him of all rights to joint assets and child custody. Julian was now only a shadow of his former arrogance, living in a temporary rented room and facing prolonged civil lawsuits. Sienna did not receive a better ending. Her crocodile tears were useless against the ironclad evidence of staging domestic abuse and siphoning assets. She was completely isolated from the Richmond community and faced charges of perjury in court. The £15,000 she tried to steal was frozen and returned to Oliver. Sienna looked at the man she once called a dry fool, now completely in command of the game, and realized that his silence was the most terrifying power of all. She had underestimated a risk expert, and that risk had destroyed her. Oliver sat on the balcony looking at the River Thames flowing lazily under London's golden sunset. He no longer felt hatred, only a deep sense of serenity. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the moment you stop apologizing for existing and start building a life that needs no permission from anyone. He had learned that sometimes what breaks creates the space for things of real value to sprout. He took a sip of tea, feeling the true stillness of his soul. The war was over. The kingdom of lies had collapsed, and from those ashes, a new Oliver was born, stronger, more sober, and freer than ever before. Thank you for joining me through the 9 chapters of a grueling journey from betrayal to rebirth. Oliver's story is a reminder that no matter how sophisticated a lie is, the truth remains the ultimate weapon. If this story has touched a part of your heart or reminded you of the power of believing in yourself, please leave a few words in the comments. From which city are you listening to this story? Your feedback is invaluable motivation for me to continue telling meaningful stories like this. Please like and subscribe so we can build a community of truth and compassion together. Take good care of yourself, and I will see you in the next stories.